All right, so we're at 1 p.m. and according to JWO, there might be a lot of people also joining from the lobby and not necessarily joining in from Zoom. So good day or good evening to all of you, wherever you are around the world. My name is Gigi Gatti, and I will be the moderator for this session. We have the pleasure of being with you today to share our experiences in cultivating inclusion, specifically on the topic of catalyzing digital inclusion through HCD, or the human-centered design process. Today, we will be sharing through the lens of an actual implementation of an applied research project called AgriPath. And AgriPath's goal is to identify and scale effective and inclusive pathways for digital advisory services to reach men, women, and youth farmers. This research is being done across 5 countries: Tanzania, Uganda, Burkina Faso, India, Nepal, and is also aiming to scale some portions of the applied research post participation of these 5 countries. We will explore enablers and barriers of digital advisory services uptake and apply an HCD process to introduce improvements to an app called farmbetter, which we are using as a proxy for digital advisory services. Our approach to inclusion goes beyond women and youth to also include vulnerable farming communities that are traditionally excluded because of factors such as low literacy levels, cost of data, cost of smart and ownership of smart devices, poor connectivity, the lack of limited mobile infrastructure a lot of you are very familiar with. So our agenda today will focus around 3 topics: design theory and application, inclusion considerations, and we will have an actual illustration taken from an Indian context. And will be presented by my colleagues, Yente Rosil, CEO of Elewa, Alfred Yeboah, Global Programs Operations Director from the Grameen Foundation US, and Dr. Rupa Singh, Client Insights for Impact Senior Project Manager from the Grameen Foundation India. So let me hand this over to you, Yente, to start. Yeah?
Thank you so much, Gigi, and welcome everyone. My name is Jens. I'm a computer scientist, originally from Belgium, but living here in Kenya for the last 7 years. And my expertise is really mostly in systems design, so both on the front end, so on the user experience and the user design, as well as on the back end, across many different sectors. I started in education, and these days I also have had quite a lot of experience in the agriculture field. What we're going to talk to you about today is a bit of a practical case, so I didn't want to make the theory on design theory too theoretical. I want to illustrate it a bit as well with some elements from the field and from practice. And specifically, as Gigi mentioned, we're going to talk about a project that we are doing in context of AgriPath, which is a multi-country, multi-stakeholder exercise to look at what different in what different ways can digital advisory services work, what works for them, how can we scale them, and and what are general best practices regarding digital advisory. The company and the application that's sort of running, and that's the target of a lot of AgriPath's activities, especially under the work packages that also I'm involved in, is called farmbetter. And farmbetter is actually a typical digital advisory service. Before I go into what they do, maybe a bit about the problem, which we're probably mostly familiar with. But on the left of the screen, we have one extension agent. And an extension agent has the role and the responsibility to sort of bring a lot of agricultural knowledge to many farmers. But then if you look at on the right, we have 2,000 to 5,000 farmers. Maybe I should have written the numbers in full. But we see that with time going by, we have less and less extension agents, and one extension agent has to cover more and more farmers, which is causing a lot of issues when it comes to knowledge dissemination, especially for small-scale holder farmers, and for more vulnerable groups, as Gigi mentioned as well. So where we see an opportunity, and we, that is the community, is in digital advisory services. So using technology to basically empower the digital extension, the extension agent, and make sure that we make his or her life more easier by broadcasting advice to several thousands of farmers, and also by allowing farmers to have access to some of this knowledge directly themselves through a fully automated fashion. FarmBetter's vision is actually best explained through the three phases they see, the role that they see digital advisory take when it comes to alleviating the challenges that extension agents have. That is 80% of all farmers' problems we're looking at automating, so that they can have an automated answer and an automated way to access information that can help them with a challenge they're having now, or how to improve the productivity of their farms, their climate resilience, and their livelihoods. 10% will still need an extension agent to come in at one point in a virtual fashion, and only 10% will still need an extension agent to visit the field. Right now, most of the cases, the extension agent actually has to visit to give real strong tailored advice. So what does FarmBetter do? They have a few features, and what you're seeing on the screen is actually the version of FarmBetter I got before we did the human-centered design process, which we started about a year and a half ago, supported by AgriPath, but also GIZ and SDC. And at the core of FarmBetter, it's still the same as it was 2 years ago. There is a matching engine where we can take the details of the farmers, add a lot of context on top. So with something as simple as a 3-page survey. In the beginning, it was 15 pages, but human-centered design today, it's only 3 pages, but I'll talk about that later. With 3 simple steps, we can get the location of the farmer, add all of this information, such as the soil type, the weather patterns, and also keep that information up to date. And then match that with the workup database, which is about 1,700 agricultural best practices, good sustainable land management practices, and thereby advise farmers on, for your crops or for the challenges you're having now, these are land management practices that will help you alleviate these challenges. So that's sort of in a nutshell what FarmBetter does. As you can see on the 6 sort of points, there's a lot more, but for the sake of time, I think when it comes to the questions, if you have specific questions about FarmBetter, please ask. I'm passionate about it and happy to assist. So when we started the process, we had one solution and one app, but we had many different users. And I'll talk a bit about those later. But we also were doing it in 5 countries. So AgriPath is doing it in Burkina Faso, Uganda, Tanzania, India, and Nepal. And then beyond that, FarmBetter is also active in Colombia, Ecuador, and Kenya, amongst others, Mozambique as well. So there's many different contexts. And if we go to the next slide, where the human-centered design process actually comes in, is that we need to sort of have this application and have this experience, that this access to information. We need to contextualize that to the different users that are using the system. And different users can be something as simple as an extension agent or a farmer, but also within each of these country contexts, there are many different contexts you need to take into account. There's the socioeconomic context, there's the gender lens, so the way in which women might engage with this technology or with agricultural best practices and knowledge in general might be different from men. Also how the family dynamic works in that sense. There's the cultural context, which is very different if you're working at West Africa, East Africa, South Asia, Latin America. They have very different cultural contexts. There's what the farmers themselves need. There's what the extension agent needs. There's what each of these stakeholder audiences wants, their personal goal. And then on the other side, there's also, for example, the infrastructure in each of these countries, which widely varies, which means what you can do with technology will vary widely in each of these contexts as well. Access to devices, technical contexts, technical capabilities, so digital literacy, as we call it. And then what apps they've already been using. So what's very important to understand is that technology is experienced through an individual lens. And when we do the human-centered design process, what we're going to try to do is approximate that lens and try to understand for our target audience, how do they engage with technology? And how can we model the application in such a way that it truly works for them, that it already fits their mental model, and that is a very small step for them to take to get access to the information and to have benefit from these applications and also use them on a day-to-day basis. Because if we don't design with the user in mind, we end up risking low to no adoption, which beats the purpose. So that's sort of what we're trying to do with human-centered design. What I want to talk about a bit in the time I have left is about how we now generally do that process. And in the next slide, I've sort of laid out broadly how it worked for this specific project, being AgriPath. Again, we started with a single app for all stakeholder audiences, so extension agents could do the same thing as farmers. It was in 5 countries, so the same recipe for Burkina Faso, Uganda, Tanzania, India, Nepal. The same recipe also for men and women. So we tried to look a bit at, okay, for each of these stakeholder audiences, the first question you need to ask is, who are they? And so when we went into this project, we did a lot of meetings because we have experts from Grameen Foundation, for example, both in India as Grameen Foundation US sitting here. We try to understand a bit from them, what is your vision? You've been working with farmers and extension agents for so long. Where do you see the gaps, also taking into account what the farmbetter app can currently do? And you try to create what we call a knowledge base. So the first step of the human-centered design process, and it's modeled a lot, the way we do it is modeled a lot on design science itself, which is a branch of a branch of science, of scientific research, a way in which to do it. So you start by building a knowledge base. And then we extended that knowledge base, and then you create a hypothesis. So knowing what we currently have, the artifact, so the app we call the artifact, knowing how it currently works, what do we, from an expert perspective, having this knowledge base, believe could help improve, for example, uptake of sustainable land management practices or whatever objective we put. In this case, that's a very core objective. Another core objective is organic spread of the application from farmer to farmer or extension agent to farmer. We believe that by changing these small things in the application we have right now, we can achieve that objective. But that's a hypothesis. And then, of course, when we have a hypothesis, we need to prove that that is indeed the case. So in this specific project, what we did 2 deep dives. So after redesigning the farmbetter app from just a general, it was mostly even UI design, so changing the user interface, changing a bit of the flows, solving a bit of low-hanging fruits. I mentioned we started with a survey of 15 pages. We cut it down to 3, and then started adding extra information later to reduce the bottleneck from the user to the application itself. So you try to identify these small low-hanging fruits, and then you go into the field. So now you have both a high fidelity prototype, so these or low fidelity prototypes. It could be as simple as having a paper with the screen, with a series of screens, and then you put that in front of people, being farmers and extension agents in these countries, and you ask them, if you are to access sustainable land management practice, what do you do? So they now have a simple piece of paper, and you ask them, we call this a fly on the wall observation. So you just act as if you're a fly on the wall, and you ask them, can you try to do this this exercise? And then they will try to click the page, and based on that you will understand, or you will get insights. It takes a while to understand the full mental model, but you will get insights into how they perceive the application. So those are simple techniques we do in the field to test whether this hypothesis is right or wrong. Secondly, there were other things like contextual inquiry, other techniques we use, where we now ask them to sort of walk us through how they're what they believe the screen would do. If you were to click this button, what do you believe will happen? And it helps us really understand how they engage with this technology. So that is one part of a deep dive. The second part is we also really have focus group discussions, in-depth focus group discussions, and these are all described in my report, which you can all download later in this call. But we do these in-depth to build this knowledge base and to form new hypotheses. So we did that in 2 phases. We first went to Burkina Faso, Uganda, Tanzania, did all these tests, and based on that, we found already a lot of insights, which I will get to in a second. Because after that, we went to India, Nepal. Again, we kept changing the learning and refining our hypothesis to align the application more to the end user needs. And I'll give some practical examples again in a second. What's very important is that we communicate at each step. So each of these visits, the first 3 country visits and the second country visits, they resulted in a large report that details all of these experiences. We also use certain more academic or more objective type of tools, such as we call it a deep score, a scoring mechanism, to have an objective sort of way to track how people are engaging with the application and how well it aligns with them. But it's very important, and you see that also in the graph, that once you have developed a prototype and tested it, so evaluated it, that you document everything, because that documentation becomes the new knowledge base, and that new knowledge base leads to new hypotheses. So one of the things that is the human centered design process never stops. These deep dives, so these country visits, they allowed us to do very thorough sweeps of, okay, this is where the application is. We do believe that we've gotten it closer to the end audience, and I'll give some examples. I keep repeating myself, but you'll get them soon. So don't be in suspense. But each iteration, once you have that done, you start tracking everything that's happening on the application, and you get to modern software development practices as well, because we also develop software after we validate the prototypes of that work in an iterative approach. So 1 month cycles, 2 week cycles, even sometimes 2 month cycles. We're going to always have our knowledge base, add a new feature, evaluate whether it works, refine the knowledge base, and keep refining this to align closer and closer to the end user. So that's the process that's going on now. Next year, we're doing a second set of deep dives, which is mostly validation, and then we will publish our final report based on that. So this is all very theoretical. This is all very abstract. I'll give very quick examples of what this looks like, of what some of these findings are, before giving it to my colleagues. The first example, which is on the next slide, and the first finding is actually a very simple one. I mentioned that, Gigi, if you could help us with the next slide, please. I mentioned that initially we had only one app for both the farmer and the extension agent, but when we went to the field, we realized that those two stakeholder audiences are actually very different. That comes in different ways. The concerns of these two stakeholder audiences, for example, are different. A farmer is mostly concerned with his or her farm and the output, the income generated, the resilience, and a couple of key performance indicators of their farm. The extension agent, we more see them as a public health official. They're concerned with the general output of their area, whether that's their ward or higher up. And so their area of concern is different, and they need to process more data points, but they also won't go necessarily to the details of a specific farm. In the most cases of the farmers, that we found that the education they had was more limited than for extension agents. Extension agents often had an academic background and a higher degree, whereas farmers sometimes didn't have that. And with the way in which they engaged with the knowledge to the agricultural best practices, which are translated for the farmers and explained, they needed much more visual information, whereas an extension agent, again, could process more text-driven, I would say larger academic, there's still small text blocks, but larger texts, more difficult words could be used with the extension agent, again, because of that academic background in agronomy. The digital literacy of farmers was more limited compared to extension agents. So and often also the smartphones these farmers had were more limited than the smartphones that the extension agents had, which are public officials, so they work for the government. And even the internet connectivity, and so the infrastructural context was very different. So the solution there, what we came up with was, okay, let's, instead of having an app for both extension agents and farmers, knowing that this app is much more difficult to use for farmers than extension agents, why don't we use WhatsApp for farmers? Because we found that every farmer we talked to across Burkina Faso, Uganda, Tanzania, that had a smartphone, and in Uganda and Tanzania, that was most of them. In Burkina Faso, that was still difficult. They had WhatsApp. So it's something they're already used to. It's something they know how to work with. So if we build a chatbot on top of WhatsApp, there's no learning curve before they can start learning. Extension agents needed more visualization. They needed to see data points of where problems are reported across an area. So you have to go to a more rich tool even than WhatsApp, which is an app. So that's sort of one of the things we did. For the farmers, we now had a separate app, which was WhatsApp. For the extension agents, we had another app. The second lesson So yeah, the first finding was that farmers and extension agents are very different, but now we're designing with that in mind. Gigi, can you please go to the next slide? The second session, now we've gone a bit too far. Now, when we went now to Nepal and India, we found that these, in the case of farmers, for example, that the end user can vary wildly because of the local context. In Nepal and India, the smartphones could handle higher ups, and farmers were more used to using different types of ups. So WhatsApp was not necessarily necessary there. They could have also gone with an up directly. But because we're using WhatsApp, we do have a minimal intersection that can work for all. And what we've done now is added a farmbetter farmer app, which also tailors for farmers who can download these apps. When it comes to extension agents, also end users can vary wildly in the sense of which role they take. Within extension, we have public extension agents, which we focused on in the initial deep dives. But then we realized that you have research actors, you have private extension agents, and they can sort of, so your private extension agents and public extension agents, and they have very different needs and they have very different ways in which and roles within that ecosystem. A public extension agent cares about all farmers within the geographical area because they have that public mandate. A private extension agent is mostly often self-employed, earns money, for example, on offering advice to farmers on sourcing inputs. So they are much more privacy concerned than a public agent. So they want to shield their farmers. So you also have to look a bit at, okay, with all of these different users, how can I plug them into that single ecosystem? And in this case, we went with a sort of role-based type of approach where cooperatives, private extension agents have private pools of data, whereas public extension agents have anonymized pools of data, but can still broadcast certain activities such as farmer field to schools they're organizing down to the general public. So those are different lessons we learned, and those are things we learned by being in the field. A last one, and I'll try to be fast. Is that last lesson I wanted to just mention today is that we always need to model applications with the end user's mental image in mind. So a lot of the focus group discussions we did with extension agents really try to ask simple questions like, what does your day look like? What are your big challenges? Where do you see room for innovation? To try to model everything. And then what we came up with, for example, was that farmbetter already had most of these things that extension agents need within their app, but they were not aligned following a mental model of an extension agent, which a public extension agent wants to do a needs assessment. Based on that, select best practices. So we already had reporting problems. We already had best practice selection based on the farmbetter algorithm, and then wants to disseminate that best practice down to the farmers and follow up on its implementation. We already had peer-to-peer dissemination and those type of things, but they weren't aligned with the mental model of the extension agents. And that's sort of where we redesigned the app. You can see the small redesign here in the top right corner. And the app is now more streamlined with how extension agents themselves see their day-to-day activities. So the next steps, we just published our second report, and I'll finalize here because I'm going a bit over time, but we are here for the questions, so happy to assist. But what we see is that what we've developed out of all of these deep dives that we've done is a sort of design theory for digital advisory services, where for digital advisory services to be successful, they need to scale correct and timely, meaning you need to earn trust of the farmer with quick wins and then promote more longer-term sustainable solutions that might have a higher burden to adopt because they're more expensive or they're more difficult. You need to have social proof. So farmers need to see from other farmers within their neighborhood that these things are working. So locally developed best practices, ways to share that. You need to give the power to the farmers, and then you need frictionless adoption. So if a farmer decides I'm going to adopt this best practice, we also need to be able to give them the resources to do it. So with these design pillars in mind, we can get the trust of the farmers and we can see an increased adoption in sustainable land management practices. And that's what we hope to prove over the next few years. So with this new design theory, is everything we're modeling is in line with that. So if you want to learn more, my reports are on the next slide. They developed with the support of GIZ and SDC and AgriPath, of course, and all the stakeholders here in our panel. So yeah, tinyurl.com/HCD for egg, and you'll get access to those reports and you can download them from there. So thanks a lot, and yeah, we're here for questions. And now I give it to Alfred for the next section.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gente, for highlighting AgriPath's experience with the human-centered design process and how that affected and also influenced FarmBetter's app and also the platform redesign. I will look closely at some of the inclusion considerations for digital advisory services and what are some of the challenges we should be paying attention to, based on AgriPath and FarmBetter app's experience. Let me quickly make the case for why there should be inclusion considerations when designing and deploying digital advisory services, like in the case of AgriPath's FarmBetter app. It is true that there have been, and in fact, there are still historical biases, especially against women smallholder farmers, when it comes to both the extent to which they are able to not only access digital advisory services, tools, but also their continued use of those tools. In fact, men and women, people with different ability levels, experience the world differently and will more likely have different circumstances and needs when it comes to the access and use of digital advisory services. We therefore need to anticipate and also deal adequately with especially the negative unintended consequences through a human-centered design, approach, or even an equity-centered design approach and deployment, especially in a case where we want to reach a lot of rural women and youth farmers, or even people who are physically challenged and are also into farming. Next slide, please. So through AgriPath's human-centered design process, there were several lessons we gathered, talking to participants, and basically wanted their realities, their felt needs, their lived experiences with previous engagement with digital tools, and also their aspirations actually reflected in the redesign of the digital advisory service and also the FarmBetter tool. The users' experiences focused on having a deep understanding of potential users, what they need, what they value, their abilities, and also their limitations. As seen in this slide, other digital advisory services may have used an equality approach of asking all users to use the same digital advisory service while narrowing the available usage channels. The characters you see here are all being required to take the same exams. In our case, the use of a digital advisory service, irrespective of their ability levels, level of digital literacy, or the existence of a thriving digital infrastructure that in fact supports their usage and adoption of a digital advisory service, or even the process of onboarding or registration for the service. That clearly is exclusionary and would not necessarily fit the needs of everyone, including rural women and youth. Next slide. Based on findings and learnings from the HCD process, the project team consciously avoided bias in the way the FarmBetter app, the platform, was redesigned. In fact, to a very large extent, the AgriPath HCD experience influenced the FarmBetter app redesign. The question is how and in what ways? The user interface is now more user-friendly. The language, the imagery used in the FarmBetter tool or app is now more inclusive and in fact, free from stereotypes. So we, for example, have both women and men images in sections of the app that are used to describe a specific agricultural problem, whilst at the same time you have the image of a woman or a man also offering solutions. So the tool now consider the different ability levels of all users, ensuring equitable access. In fact, the project team carefully evaluated any potential privacy or security concerns, and we are addressing them, especially those related to gender, because of, as you may know, the many harmful gender and social norms that we have, especially in some of these agricultural communities, and then the limited ability of, let's say, women farmers to travel even for a digital literacy training, or having to seek, permission from their spouses. So a lot of work went into incorporating fairness or equity, insensitivity to gender. More importantly, there was a deliberate effort to deal with any potential unintended consequences of the farmbetter app redesign that do not do harm. So at least ensuring there is some level of safeguarding for all users, irrespective of their gender. Example also is that the ability of women rural farmers to use WhatsApp have now been taken on board and into consideration. Again, any ethical concerns such as potential for the farmbetter app and its deployment to perpetuate systemic biases or discrimination are adequately being dealt with. So while I bring my submission to a close, I would want to reiterate the point that digital advisory services delivery channels need to be gender sensitive, whilst we reinforce each of the channels that are deployed. It necessarily must have both a diagnostic and a counseling session to tailor content to different categories of users. I will now hand over to my colleague, Rupa, with Grameen Foundation India, to situate how the human-centered design process provided a unique framework for establishing the needed evidence for the redesign of the farmbetter app from an Indian context, and also how the team carried out the HCD process that was women-centric. Thank you, and over to you, Rupa.
Thanks, Alfred. Very good morning for each and everybody who have joined for this session. Warm welcome from my side from India. So before jumping in to actual context, let me try explaining you a scenario how an agriculture looks in India. India being highest populated country, there are 70% of the population are dependent on agriculture. Among these, 3/4 are small and marginal farmers who own an agricultural land up to 2 hectares. With in all the operations, majorly close to 70% of the operations in agriculture is carried by women. So India being very topographically different, we have plain lands, we have hilly regions, we have terrains, we have snowy regions. So it has a very heterogeneous land of cultivation, and the range of crops are quite varied. We have a wide range of annuals, perennials, horticulture crops, agroforestry, sericulture, etc. Now, coming to the AgriPath project itself, the AgriPath project has been laid off in Uttar Pradesh, which is towards the northeast part of India, where farming is the major occupation of state. Close to 80% of the population is dependent on farming. Specifically, where this AgriPath project is taking place, there the major crops are wheat and paddy, and the topography being the plain land irrigated by the river Ganga. So human-centered design was one of the experiment which was employed as a part of AgriPath project. So while executing any of the experiment, any of the research experiment, there are two scenarios wherein the experiment would be quite narrow and deep enough, or very wide and shallow enough. But when we think of, an experiment involving the humans, it need not be shallow or not even narrow. It has to be as deep as possible and as wide as it can be. So when we thought of executing human-centered design in India, the idea was we need to interview each and every stakeholders in this agriculture portfolio who are involved in India. Thus, a matrix was created which involved the research partners, institutional partners, agri-extension agents, as well as the farmers. So, who were the research partners interviewed for the human-centered design? Those were the scientists from International Rice Research Institute situated at Varanasi and Krishi Vigyan Kendra, so called in Hindi. When translated to English, it would be Agriculture Science Center. These agriculture science centers are situated at district headquarters, wherein the location specific research would be carried out. There would be demonstration plots to demonstrate a bunch of farmers whenever necessary across the season and across the area as well. So these IRRI and Krishi Vigyan Kendras, a lot of research would have been taken place and they would be well documented as well. So we had a session with them to understand how these sustainable land management practices promoted could be under the umbrella of digital advisory services and how to reach it to the farmers. Then comes the institutional partners who bridge the gap between the policymakers, the government, to the ultimate sink that are the farmers. So the institutional farmers involved in the human-centered designs were Banaras Hindu University. This is a university which also have a section of agricultural college where we did interacted with the social scientists being from the economics background, statistics background, and extension background to the crop science including entomologist pathologist. So alongside we did interacted with the state department of horticulture who have a major share in developing the policies in favor of the farming community of the state. These were the people who frame the top of the pyramid, and obviously it's not all about what they decide, what the research is done. Ultimate aim has to be how it would be observed by the farmers in the ground basically. Thus a separate session was also conducted with the agriculture extension agents, they being a Gramin Mitra. In Gramin Foundation India, we have a bunch of Gramin Mitras who are basically farmers, a bit more educated, bit more vocal, bit more, volunteering in supporting their villagers for their upliftment. So we have a bunch, these Gramin Mitras are basically the female and male people who would be helping each other, having much more knowledge than any of the average people in the village. So there has been a focus group discussion done with the Gramin Mitras. These are also mobile literate. They are the people who are helping financially how to access the financial instrument to a farmer in the village as well. So we can say that they are mobile literate and they are very good in using the apps, using the mobile. So the then existing farm better version of app was handed over to these Gramin Mitras and it was tested for its user friendly, how the icons are appearing, how is the information within, how it has to be altered, so on and so forth. So the feedback has been taken from the bunch of Gramin Mitras in the form of focus groups. Then the ultimate sink for any agriculture projects are the farmers. There has been one-to-one interaction with the two bunch of farmers, one being male farmers and the other being female farmers. The approach has been quite different. As Alfred said, there is a there is a way in which the male or a female people would be perceiving the things. Just to study those aspects as well, there has to be there was a one-to-one interaction with the male farmers and one-to-one interaction with the female farmers as well. So we did observe what they actually want out of a digital advisory services when it comes to sustainable land and crop management system. Gigi, next slide, please. Yeah, so obviously women is this women-centric, human-centered design. So when we think of agriculture, as I have earlier said, 70% of the operations are carried by the women. So in the society, there is a hindrance, though she would be able to achieve what she want, but in presence or absence of other person, she behave differently. So for any human-centric design, if it happens, then this might be a cause for the failure of future challenges. So what we thought was like we need to try to understand her perspective as well when it comes to the app. So we tried creating a different sort of environment for this experiment, wherein we did consider the solicitation of opinions were conducted discriminately, like male farmers were interacted separately and female farmers were interacted separately, so that the female farmer should open up themselves with uninhibited expressions could be documented. Then it also depends on the way the who is interacting with the female farmer. If say, a man is interacting with a female farmer, there might be a bit of hesitance when we consider socio-cultural norms in a country like India. So she might be a bit hesitant to express what she feels. So we did design the experiment in such a way that a proficient female facilitator was strategically engaged to work along with the female extension agent or female farmers. When we think of, though in India, there is a high penetration of smartphone. As per our previous study in one of the agri project, we came to know that close to 30% of the households would be having the smartphone. But again, the physical ownership of the smartphone would mostly be with the male counterpart of the household. So in field, there is, more of the agriculture work is skewed towards the female, but somehow when it comes to the digital advisory services, majorly the men would be having the device. So what we thought was like we tried, equipping the respondent with the tab or mobile temporarily so that we can guide her how to use and also document the feedback what she feels on the app. Then, India being multilingualistic country, here the people speak close to 26 languages. The script is being more than, say 30 languages. So there has to be the way the communication should be done with the farmers, especially with the female farmers. So in Uttar Pradesh, that is Hindi is the local language which is spoken, and they also have a different dialect. So we did had people within our team of human-centered design wherein they could speak in the local dialect. So this would be definitely enhancing the comprehension and facilitating a more effective exchange of information. So moreover, when these experiments would be happening, we need to be very sure of what is expected from the farmer. We were up to it, and also we did make sure that each and every farmer or extension agent or the institutional partners or research partner should be knowing the perspective of future, that is digital information would definitely be helping the farming community. Especially we hardly know what would be the future if the situation like COVID appears again. The farming system would also be equipped with the modernized technology so that they should have their livelihood. Yeah, here I end my presentation. I would request for any questions and suggestions.
Thank you so much, Rupa. And thank you so much, Alfred and Yente, for your presentations as well. Before we open the Q&A, I'd like to give you just a little bit of a background on AgriPath. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is actually the much bigger consortium who is basically doing all this work, wonderful work. It's more than the two organizations that you are hearing today. And one of the major deliverables under this applied research project is actually a public tool. And it's a public toolkit for digital advisory systems and practitioners and stakeholders, and all the lessons learned and more presented today will inform the development of that toolkit. So
Gigi, you're on mute.
so did you hear the previous slide or no?
Previous slide was done, and this slide we lost you.
Okay, so this is where I got muted. Okay, I'm sorry about that. So as I was saying, we need your help. I'm asking for your help. If you have time to do a 1-minute survey using the link or the QR code, we would really appreciate. The public toolkit is going to be disseminated to everyone who's interested, and it is going to be very focused on inclusion. That will separate it from all the other toolkits out there. And all the lessons learned and all the methodologies that you have basically heard today will be included there, and much, much more. This is a 5-year project, so we are still halfway through, but we are already starting to develop the toolkit as we are gaining more information. All right, so let's dive into the Q&A. So we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A, and the first one is actually from Dauda. I hope I'm, saying the name correctly. How do we account for the illiteracy of farmers who cannot read and write? And maybe I will farm that question to you, Yente.
Sure, thank you, and a great question, actually. It's part of a larger discussion. There's several technologies we looked into to include farmers, also even beyond the smartphone, because we often realize that in some of the countries that we visit, and again, this is country specific, but if I take the example of Burkina Faso, the smartphone penetration there is much lower than Uganda and Tanzania, which is still lower than Tanzania and than India and Nepal. And we decided to go for WhatsApp because WhatsApp allows to transfer a bit richer, so more rich user experiences. It can send videos, it can send location back and forth, which is easy for our algorithm. It can send voice notes. So often farmers can explain their problem sending a voice note, and voice note is actually one of the features we see is quite popular with them. But yeah, so, and then photos, videos, animations. The other advantage WhatsApp has is that it works extremely well with offline. So if you have intermittent connectivity, WhatsApp is actually really optimized for on-offline type of behavior. So that's why it was a great tool. Of course, we had to make a choice, and we realized we can't reach all farmers yet. We are looking into different types of technologies right now. For example, the use of basically voice. So IVR systems, so having these voice type of menus, we're looking into also having some things, perhaps not SMS, because there's also the cost perspective, but maybe USSD is an option that we're looking into. So we are looking at also opening it up to non-smartphone users, but that is not something that we've gotten to so far. And that's something we still have to look into. So it's a trade-off you have to make. You have to develop for, actually, I mean, if you go for SMS, if you go for IVR technology, it's harder to visualize how to implement, for example, a sustainable land management practice, as if you can send images, if you can send videos. And that's why we chose WhatsApp in the end. So there's always that trade-off.
Thank you very much.
One
Yes.
last thing, if you allow me, we do see that the smartphone penetration in countries here in for example, in East Africa, where I'm based, is growing very rapidly. We're now at lower bound says 35%, but upper bound says about 70% of people within the country have a smartphone, and these numbers have gone up very quickly. So when we decided WhatsApp, we also decided with a lens on 5 years, 10 years in the future, realizing that we will no longer have that adoption problem then. Sorry, Gigi, I'm done.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So I think that topic of illiteracy is really, really a huge, challenge. And I'm wondering, from the Indian context as well, Rupa, how are you addressing this, especially for women? Yeah.
Thanks, Gigi. See, At present, the situation is like the digital advisory services may not be the sole response. It has to complement with other form of extension service in India. Being the government extension service is having a good root system. So there are departments of horticulture, agriculture, fishery at state level. At district level, there are district headquarters. At taluka, maybe at blocks also we have. For a community of 3 to 4, there is an agriculture officer or horticulture officers who are there to serve the people. So this digital advisory services can complement. So over the years, it might increase its share. But yes, it's not only the people who can't read or the people who can't write, they can definitely get in touch with the extension agents, the private or public for that matter. That is the present situation. But somehow, with this particular experiment with farmbetter, the people are able to record their voice. The people are able to send the photos of the any of the practices in seeking answers through the farmbetter or through the WhatsApp. WhatsApp is very much familiar with the community nowadays. So that is the mode of operations which is happening in India.
Thank you so much, Rupa. So another question is actually on the taking into account the feedback of the farmers in terms of the agile process. And I think this question is really, maybe how do we iterate, right? In terms of the agile process. And again, Yente, maybe I can ask you to answer this question. I mean, how many iterations do we have to go through? When do we know, when to stop,
Yeah.
we stop iterating at all?
Is there a stop? That's we've all been part of this process for the last months, or even over a year and a half. And yeah, everything is really very iterative. And we have the support of, for example, Rupa in India. What actually happens is we capture a lot of feedback from farmers by looking at usage statistics, for example, of the application. We also look at where farmers sometimes get stuck or where interactions stop. And then we try to sort of optimize those flows. And then we publish new versions and measure if it now works better or not. So there's a lot of A/B testing. So you try something else, you see what works best. And then there's also a lot of testing by Rupa and her team, for example, on the ground, whenever we release a new feature, also to see whether it's straightforward, whether it aligns with the farmers and the extension agents, their vision. So there is a lot of testing, and that informs the next cycle, and then we keep developing. So usually we release a new version every 3 to 4 weeks. Sometimes it's a bit shorter, sometimes it's a bit longer, depending on what our objectives are for that time period. So it is a very iterative process. Maybe I might not have presented it like that, but there have been, even within those long periods, a lot of iterations.
Yeah. So maybe one of the data points, that we probably need to share is the fact that because this is an action research project, there is actually going to be some form of a control and treatment group, right, in some of the countries. And that is something that is also quite important, that you are able to compare, the evidence, or whatever is going on, to a control group. So in not in all cases do we need a randomized control trial approach, but definitely it is something that everybody needs to consider. So there's a question here in me, how can we be part of this project? And thank you so much for your interest, in our presentation and in the consortium in general. So if you are able to provide us, feedback for the survey link, we'll definitely get in touch with you. I have put in 3 names in here, which we could reach out with you and see. We are not exclusive in the sense that we are always happy to receive feedback and to have folks who have actually been engaged in digital advisory services and even on developing toolkits, to be, for instance, can we leverage on the toolkits or on the work that you have done? How can we take that into consideration? Do you have any specifically challenges, that we still need to be able to address? So these are things that we would be very open about in terms of collaboration. And I don't see any other question unless somebody has posted anything new. But we do have, as Yente was saying, we do have some reports, okay, that are available for the public. And again, this is something that we hope will benefit all types of stakeholders for digital agriculture services or systems. All right, so we are quite early. Are there any more questions? Collaboration, the GAFU says, from the Ethiopian Institute of Agriculture Research. Yes, the GAFU, you can contact us and we can definitely take that offline. Yeah.
Yeah, Gigi, there is a hand up, Boluwa Tife. I don't know if the person is able to speak, but there's a hand up. If you check the participants.
Yeah, I don't see a hand up on my end though. That's the problem. It's not appearing on me. Do you think you can take it, Alfred?
I mean, the person's hand is up. So yeah, Boluwa Tife, you can come in.
Can you unmute yourself? I can't seem to see it. Yeah. Okay, let's see.
Yeah, I think the person is still muted.
Talking is permitted, I think. Talking is permitted. Hello? Oh, permitted. Participants are not permitted to talk. Actually, I have put in there allowed to talk, but I don't know why it's not working. I'm so sorry. Yeah, so that is I guess, a technical glitch that we have to ask Zoom to participate in an HCD session for the users so that these things can actually work. But I did tag that as talking as permitted, and I don't know, I don't have full control over the presentation. But in behalf of my colleagues, from Elewa, from Grameen Foundation, and also from the rest of the consortium, thank you so much for joining us today. We truly, truly appreciate your presence, and we hope to be able to hear from you soon. The recording will also be available on the ICT for Ag website, and please feel free to share this among your colleagues and whoever you feel would actually be very interested in this topic. So thank you so much, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.